How's everybody doing? Great to be learning with you on a Wednesday, Yom Revi'i. Let's light up the darkness. Who's in the house on a Wednesday? Nancy, North Carolina. Guy in Ohio. Melissa in Great Neck. Bella in Florida. Steven in New Hampshire. Bella in Texas. Lucy in Minnesota. Yehud in South Carolina. Renee, Indiana. Paul in the Great Northwest. Lorraine in Texas, who loved the baseball joke. Told one, shared a joke on the Facebook page today. You guys might enjoy, or on the Instagram. Chaim in Florida, Ilanit in Silver Spring, Alan in New York City, Norm in 29 Palms, Bill in Mid-Missouri. Let's be efficient. Reminder that I'm going to have to take a few days off after tonight. So the class will resume on Tuesday. After tonight, the next class is Tuesday. So we're doing a really good job of making up ground, getting back on the schedule. This is an interruption in that, but we've shown we can do it. And then we'll recapture that ground, and we will get caught up with God's help. Okay, single daf tonight. We're picking this up near the bottom of page 17b. I mean, maybe like 3/5 of the way down the page, actually. And our daf tonight is page 16 here in Tractate Shevuos, 26th volume of the Talmud. Continuing our discussion of Mishna number 1 in chapter 2. The Mishna teaches, our Mishna here taught, that as part of the consecration ceremony, right, we're talking about what ceremony, generally we're talking about one who is tamei, knew he was tamei, forgot he was tamei, entered the temple, the courtyards, the precincts of the Holy Temple when it stood in Jerusalem while he was tamei, in a state of ritual impurity. He didn't know he was doing it, he didn't do this intentionally. Then later he realizes, oh my gosh, I was standing in the Holy Temple while I was impure. So because he had awareness at the beginning, awareness at the end, he becomes obligated to bring the sliding scale offering. Okay, well, what is considered standing in the precincts of the Holy Temple? And then our Mishnah here define, well, what are the borders of it? And are those borders forever? No. If we wanted to expand the borders of the Holy Temple or the borders of the holy city of Jerusalem, there is this ceremony that would be required involving bringing 2 thanksgiving offerings and reciting a special psalm, and a king, a prophet, the high priest, the Urim V'Tumim. All kinds of requirements, very unlikely to happen again. But now we're going to discuss that it was the original, right, consecration of the Holy Temple, of the tabernacle in the wilderness. And then when Solomon dedicated the Holy Temple, the first temple. And then at the commencement of the Second Temple era, when Ezra led the exiles back from Babylonia, they had such a ceremony. but they lacked some of those elements. So did they consecrate this area as part of the Holy Temple or not? That'll be the discussion tonight. The Mishna taught that as part of the consecration ceremony, the court would move forward. So that's the Sanhedrin. That's another element. And 2 thanksgiving offerings would be brought after them. And all of the Jewish people would follow behind them. So the Gemara asks, is this to say that the members of the court walked in front of the thanksgiving offering? But isn't it written in the verse from which this ceremony is derived, speaking of the Babylonian exiles coming back and dedicating the second temple, here in Nehemiah, and I placed 2 large thanks offerings, and we went in procession to the right upon the wall toward the dung gate, and after them went Hoshea and half of the princes of Yehuda, of Judah. That's Nehemiah 12, verses 31 and 32. So it seems like it's not that the court walked ahead of the offerings, but rather the offerings went ahead of the court. So the Gemara answers, this is what the Mishna is saying. The court moves forward. And how is this done? The 2 thanks offerings move forward, and the court follows after them. The Gemara clarifies this point. How exactly did the 2 thanks offerings move forward? So Rabbi Chia and Rabbi Shimon, son of Rebbe, disagree about this. One sage says 1 thanks offering alongside the other, and the other sage says 1 behind the other. So according to the one who says that the 2 offerings moved alongside one alongside the other, the thanks offering that the Mishnah refers to as the inner one is that which is closest to the wall. According to the one who says that the 2 offerings moved one behind the other, the thanks offering that is called the inner one is that which is closest to the members of the court, advancing behind the thanks offerings. Now the Gemara analyzes these 2 opinions. We learned in the Mishnah, when they would reach the end of the place, that they desired to consecrate, right? That's the whole point of this ceremony, is to expand what we consider the courtyards of the Holy Temple, or to expand what we consider to be the boundaries of the Holy City of Jerusalem. Okay, so we learned in the Mishnah that when they would reach the end of the place that they desired to consecrate, the inner thanks offering would be eaten and the outer one would be burned. So granted, according to the one who says that the 2 thanks offerings move forward one behind the other, and that the inner one is the one that was in the rear, closer to the court, it is due to this that the inner one is eaten, because the outer one came before it and consecrated the additional area. So that is now a sanctified place fit for eating of the thanks offering loaves. But according to the one who says that the 2 thanks offerings moved forward one alongside the other, the 2 of them together consecrated the additional area. Why then is the inner one eaten and the outer one burned? So the Gemara asks, and according to your reasoning, according to the one who says that the 2 offerings move one behind the other, does one offering by itself consecrate the area? Didn't we learn in the Mishna that with regard to any addition that was not made with all these ceremonial procedures, the addition is not consecrated? And so even according to the one who says that the correct reading of the Mishnah is with regard to any addition that was not made with any one of all these ceremonial procedures, the addition is not consecrated. Nevertheless, these 2 thanks offerings are 1 mitzvah. There's 2 loaves that act as 1 mitzvah. So how are you going to make a distinction between them? One without the other would not consecrate the area. Now we're on page 16a. So based on a ruling of a prophet, the loaves of 1 thanks offering were eaten, and based on a ruling of a prophet, the loaves of the other thanks offering were burned. The prophets, Haggai, Zechariah, and Malachi, who lived in the time of Ezra and Nehemiah's reconsecration of Jerusalem, instructed the people concerning how the ceremony should be conducted without providing reasons for the procedures. Okay, 1 of the loaves was eaten, 1 was burned. How did they know which was which? They didn't derive it from a verse. They had a prophet there telling them how to run this procedure. And I would not be surprised, though I certainly we wouldn't rely on it. We're going to study everything we can. But I wouldn't be surprised if when Mashiach comes And the third temple is rebuilt in Jerusalem, maybe speedily and soon in our days, and we say Amen. We expect that Mashiach will have what to say about exactly where the building goes, or maybe God's self will erect the Holy Temple. Certainly many opinions that say that. But we will have guidance at that time, whether it be Mashiach or the return of Ezekiel or Eliyahu Hanavi, Elijah the prophet, who never died and comes, sort of shuttles back and forth between the world of souls and our world. I expect we'll have some help. But we still have a responsibility to learn as much as we can on our own. What just happened? That's weird. I think we're still streaming, however. Okay. Let's see. Where am I? Okay. The Mishnah taught, with regard to any addition to the temple that was not made with all these ceremonial procedures, one who enters there while ritually impure is not liable. Right? So if there was an area that was not part of the original precincts of the Holy Temple, and they went through such a ceremony to expand it, but they didn't do all these procedures that the Mishnah is saying are necessary, well then that didn't become part of the Holy Temple. And if somebody was tamei and was standing there, he would not become liable to bring the sliding scale sin offering. That's what the Mishnah said. It was stated that the Amoraim, the sages of the Gemara, disagreed about the text of the Mishnah. Rav Huna says, we learned in the Mishnah with all these, which means that all of these procedures are indispensable, and if even one of them is missing, the consecration does not take effect. Nice try. You wanted to expand the precincts of the temple, but you didn't have a king, or you didn't have a prophet, or you didn't have the Urim V'Tumim, so you didn't expand that area. But Rav Nachman says, we learned in the Mishnah, with one of all these, i.e. any one of these procedures, suffices for the consecration to take effect. So which is it? Do we need all of them or just one of them? The Gemara further clarifies this disagreement. Rav Huna says, we learned in the Mishnah with all these. And so the Gemara explains, he maintains that the initial consecration of the temple in the days of David and Solomon sanctified it for its time and sanctified it forever. Therefore, the site of the temple retained its original sanctity even during the days of the Second Temple. And Ezra, who reconsecrated the area, did so merely as a commemoration of the initial consecration. It was a nice welcome back ceremony where the temple was wrecked, the first temple was wrecked. We're going to rebuild on this site, but the land that it's going to stand on is already consecrated. It was consecrated in the days of David and Solomon. It was consecrated because this was the earthly abode of God. And so that is a consecration that is forever. And it's not that Ezra reconsecrated, it's that he rededicated. That's a big difference. Accordingly, even though there was no king or Urim V'Tumim in the days of Ezra, the entire area was fully consecrated because it never stopped being consecrated. By contrast, in order to consecrate an area that had not been part of the initial consecration, then all of these procedures are necessary and none of them can be omitted. That's Rav Huna's opinion. Now, Rav Nachman, he says, we learned in the Mishnah with one of all these. Right? So they're arguing here about what the text of the Mishnah actually says. So the Gemara explains, he maintains that the initial consecration of the temple sanctified it for its time only and did not sanctify it forever. Therefore, Ezra came and consecrated the temple and its courtyards, even though there was no king or Urim V'Tumim. So consequently, it follows that there is no need for all of these procedures in order for the consecration to take effect, because if it required reconsecration, it received it. The second temple stood on holy ground. It was consecrated. And so if the original consecration of the first temple somehow was negated when that temple was destroyed, and Ezra was able to reconsecrate even though he had no king or Urim V'Tumim, it must be that consecration can take hold even in the absence of those elements. Rava raised an objection to Rav Nachman's view. The Mishnah explicitly states any addition that was not made with all these procedures doesn't work. Rav Nachman said to him, so amend the Mishnah and teach it as stating with one of all these procedures. Now, the Gemara cites a proof against the opinion of Rav Nachman, right? You can't just change the text, Rav Nachman. What are you doing? Come in here, a Baraisa. Abba Shaul says there were two ponds on the Mount of Olives, a lower pond and an upper pond. The lower pond was consecrated during the time of the first temple with all the procedures mentioned in the Mishnah, right? King David, the high priest, the Urim V'Tumim, etc. And it has the sanctity of Jerusalem for all purposes. By contrast, the upper pond was not consecrated with all these procedures, but rather it was consecrated by those who returned from the Babylonian exile without a king and without an Urim V'Tumim. So the Baraisa continues, with regard to the lower pond, whose consecration was complete, tamei ha'aretz, meaning uneducated people, who were not scrupulous in their observance of the mitzvahs relating to tithes and ritual purity, would enter into there and would partake of offerings of lesser sanctity that may be eaten in all of Jerusalem there, but they would not partake of second tithe there because they conducted themselves stringently concerning the matter of second tithe. And chaverim, right, people who are well educated in Torah law, fellow sages, so to speak, who were meticulous in their observance of these mitzvahs, would partake of both offerings of lesser sanctity and second tithe there. So the proof is explained. As for the upper pond, whose consecration was incomplete, tamei ha'aretz would enter into there and partake of offerings of lesser sanctity there, but would not partake of second tithe. And chaverim would partake of neither offerings of lesser sanctity nor second tithe there. And for what reason did they not consecrate the upper pond? It was because additions can be made to the city of Jerusalem or to the temple courtyards only by a special body comprising of the king, the prophet, the Urim V'Tumim, the Sanhedrin of 71, and with 2 thanks offerings and a special song. So the Gemara asks, but why did they consecrate the upper pond if they could not do so properly? If you're saying this is a proof that without all these elements, the consecration does not hold, and so they did some kind of semi-consecration of this upper pond on the Mount of Olives, right? Upper meaning further away from Jerusalem, because the Mount of Olives is like a hill that faces the Temple Mount, right? This is the Temple Mount. This is the Mount of Olives. This is a big cemetery if you're ever there. And all these graves are facing, right, Jerusalem, the walls of Jerusalem, and the Temple Mount, which is right here. So the upper pond would be up this hill, further away from Jerusalem proper, the walled city, and the Temple Mount. You'd go down this valley and up. So the lower pond was close enough to be considered Jerusalem. So the question is, regarding this upper pond, why did they do some kind of a consecration ceremony that would not consecrate that region, that section of the Mount of Olives, according to this law that you need all the elements, but they did a partial consecration? What was its purpose? Why'd they do that? And the Gemara responds, why did they consecrate it? Didn't you say that they did not consecrate it? Rather, the question should be asked as follows. Given that they could not consecrate the upper pond, because there was no king or Urim V'Tumim available, why did they bring it within the walls of the city? And the Gemara answers, because it was a weak point of Jerusalem, and it would have been easy to conquer the city from there. It became necessary to include it within the wall. So the Baraisa seems to present explicit proof against the opinion of Rav Nachman, who holds that there is no need for all the procedures listed in the Mishna in order for the consecration to be complete. Here, they had a defensive reason, a militarily defensive reason, to bring that area of that upper pond into the city, so to speak, the walls within the walls of the city as a military matter. And certainly if they had the ability to consecrate it so that it would have the same level of sanctity as all of Jerusalem, they would have. they were unable to do that. So they only brought it in as a physical matter, but not as a spiritual matter. This seems like strong evidence that you cannot consecrate an area unless you have all these elements, contrary to the opinion of Rav Nachman. Now, the Gemara rejects this whole proof, or counterproof. This is a dispute between Tanaim as to whether the initial consecration of Jerusalem and the temple sanctified them only for their time or forever. Abba Shaul maintains that the initial consecration lapsed, and therefore the reconsecration required all of the procedures mentioned in the Mishnah. Where is this dispute taught? As it is taught in a Mishnah in Tractate Eduyos 8:6. Rabbi Eliezer says, I heard that when they were building the sanctuary in the second temple, they fashioned temporary curtains for the sanctuary and temporary curtains for the courtyards to serve as partitions until the construction of the stone walls was completed. So the difference was only that in the sanctuary, the workers built the walls outside the curtains without entering. And in the courtyards, the workers built the walls within the curtains. Rabbi Yehoshua says, I heard that one sacrifices offerings on the altar, even if there is no temple, and one partakes of offerings of the most sacred order in the temple courtyard, even if there are no curtains, and one partakes of offerings of lesser sanctity and second tithe produce in Jerusalem, even if there is no wall surrounding the city. And this is due to the fact that the initial consecration sanctified the temple and Jerusalem for their time and also sanctified them forever. So the Gemara concludes its proof from the fact that Rabbi Yehoshua based his opinion on the principle that the initial consecration sanctified the temple and Jerusalem forever. Can one not learn by inference that Rabbi Eliezer maintains that it did not sanctify them forever? So apparently this issue is the subject of a dispute between Tanaim. Rabbi Yehoshua and Rabbi Eliezer are sages from an earlier period, sages of the Mishnah, and therefore considered more authoritative because they established their views. They were closer in time to the revelation at Sinai, and so the teachings had one less generation of dilution, or several generations less dilution compared to the traditions as received by the Amoraim, the sages of the Gemara. So even the Tanaim could not agree on whether when Jerusalem was sanctified, when the first temple, this Temple of Solomon, that area was sanctified, was that consecration only for the length of time that Jerusalem and the first temple would stand before their destruction at the time of the Babylonian conquest by Nebuchadnezzar, and then after that, when they established Jerusalem and the Holy Temple again for the second temple period, they would need to make a new consecration of the same areas, or was it consecrated for once and forever? And so when Ezra led the exiles back, they were just dedicating, they weren't making an actual consecration. Even the Tanaim disagree about this. Ravina said to Rav Ashi, who are certainly Amoraim, Rav Ashi is one of the editors of the Gemara, so late in the Gemara period. From where do you draw this inference? I mean, Ravina and Rav Ashi, they are the editors of the Gemara. Perhaps everyone maintains that the initial consecration sanctified the temple and Jerusalem for their time, and also sanctified them forever. And one sage, Rabbi Eliezer, stated that tradition, which he heard from his teachers, and the other sage, Rabbi Yehoshua, stated that tradition, a different tradition, which he heard from his teachers. And there is no dispute between them. And if you would say, why do I need curtains at all, according to Rabbi Eliezer, the original sanctity remained when Jerusalem was not surrounded by walls, and similarly, the presence or absence of the curtains is irrelevant to the sanctity of the temple area. So the Gemara answers, the curtains were established merely for seclusion, as it would have been unbecoming for the activity in the most sacred venue to be visible for all. So rather, this matter is a subject to a dispute between these Tanaim, as it is taught in the Baraisa with regard to the walled cities listed in the Mishnah in Tractate Arachin, page 32a. Rabbi Yishmael, the son of Rabbi Yosei, said, Why did the sages enumerate specifically these 9 cities as cities that were walled since the days of Joshua, son of Nun? In fact, there were many more. And the reason is that when the exiles ascended to Eretz Yisrael from Babylonia in the time of Ezra, they found these cities and consecrated them as walled cities. But the sanctity of the first walled cities enumerated in the book of Joshua was nullified when settlement in Eretz Yisrael was negated and the Jewish people were exiled. So the Gemara comments, apparently, Rabbi Yishmael, the son of Rabbi Yosei, maintains the initial consecration sanctified the temple and Jerusalem for their time only, but did not sanctify them forever. So now the Gemara raises a contradiction from a different Baraisa. Rabbi Yishmael, the son of Rabbi Yosei, says, were these cities that they enumerated in Tractate Arachin the only walled cities? But isn't it already stated? 60 cities. All the region of Argob, the kingdom of Og, king of Bashan, all these were cities fortified with high walls, gates, and bars. That's Deuteronomy 3, verses 4 and 5, indicating that there were many walled cities in the time of Joshua. So rather, why then did the sages enumerate specifically these cities? It is due to the fact that when the exiles ascended from Babylonia, they found these and consecrated them as walled cities. So now the Gemara gets to the heart of the matter. They consecrated them? If their sanctity remained, it should not have been necessary to consecrate them. Now, don't we say later in the same Baraisa that it is not necessary to consecrate them? So the Gemara clarifies, rather, this is what the Baraisa means to say. When the exiles ascended from Babylonia, they found these cities and enumerated them. They didn't make them holy. They were already consecrated. They remained consecrated, but they identified them and numbered them. So the Baraisa continues, and not only these, but in any city with regard to which you receive a tradition from your ancestors that it was surrounded by a wall from the days of Joshua, son of Nun, who led the children of Israel into the land of Israel out of the wilderness. All these mitzvahs, all these commandments with regard to walled cities are observed in it, due to the fact that the initial consecration sanctified the temple and Jerusalem for their time and sanctified them forever. So the Gemara comments, but this is difficult, as there is a contradiction between one statement of Rabbi Yishmael bar Yosei and another statement of Rabbi Yishmael bar Yosei. So the Gemara answers, if you wish, say that there are 2 Tanaim who disagree with regard to the opinion of Rabbi Yishmael bar Yosei. Each transmitted Rabbi Yishmael's opinion in a different manner. Or if you wish, say instead that one of the traditions is mistaken, as one of the Baraisas was stated by Rabbi Elazar bar Yosei and not his brother Rabbi Yishmael. And as it is taught in Baraisa, Rabbi Elazar bar Yosei says that the verse with regard to walled cities, Leviticus 25:30, where it says, which has a wall, law, which has law a wall. And here the word law is written with an aleph, which indicates a negative, no. And accordingly, the verse would be stating to the contrary, that the city does not have a wall. But its vocalization is in the sense of its homonym, that sounds the same, law with a vav, which means that it has a wall, right? If you read it, it sounds the same, but if you read it with a lamed aleph, it means it doesn't have a wall. And if you read it lamed vav, it means it does have a wall. And the tradition seems to indicate that it does have a wall. That's what the law is talking about. So this indicates that even if it does not presently have a wall, but it had a wall previously, it retains its status as a walled city. And it is Rabbi Elazar bar Yosei who maintains that the first consecration sanctified the temple and Jerusalem forever. Now we're on page 16b. The Mishna taught about one who was tahor, ritually pure, when he entered the holy temple, but he became impure while he was standing in the temple courtyard, and afterward his impurity was hidden from him. So the Gemara asks, from where do we derive that one is liable, even if he contracted impurity in the temple courtyard, and he failed to leave immediately by way of the shortest route? And not only if he entered the temple courtyard when he was already impure, right? We originally stated this law that the example was he went to a funeral in the morning during a festival. He was in Jerusalem visiting. He became tamei. Then he entered the holy temple, having forgot that he was tamei. And then later he left the temple and remembered, oh my gosh, I was in the temple while I was tamei. So he has to bring that offering. And now we're saying no, but also this applies if somebody became tamei while standing in the courtyard. And how do we derive that? Rabbi Elazar says, one verse states, Numbers 19:13, he has defiled the tabernacle of the Lord. Right? One who is tamei by being in it has defiled the tabernacle of the Lord. And a different verse, 7 verses later, Numbers 19:20, says, for he has defiled the temple of the Lord. Right? So the first one, where we're translating as tabernacle, there we're talking about the mishkan. Right? The mishkan is the word for tabernacle, right? The portable tabernacle that Moses supervised its construction in the wilderness after we left Egypt. And it was the central place of worship after Joshua led the children of Israel into the land of Israel for hundreds of years, about 400 years. Then finally, David, sort of sparked the project, and Solomon realized it, constructed the first temple, and then they consecrated that whole area. And that we refer to as the Beis HaMikdash. Beis HaMikdash, right? So Mikdash is how we're translating the temple, the holy temple. It's the place, the house of holiness. That's what it literally means, the house of holiness. So what's going on here? One verse says he defiled the mishkan, the tabernacle. The other one says, for he has defiled the mikdash, the temple of the Lord. So, yeah, the mikdash. And one says he has defiled the mikdash of the Lord. So, but they both seem to be referring to the same thing. So the point is that the law, although the word changes, normally we mean, well, both refer to the central place of worship of the Jewish people. So basically the same law is taught twice. If this second verse is not needed for the matter of one who contracted impurity outside before he entered the temple courtyard, as this situation is already referred to in the previous verse, so then we apply the second verse to the matter of one who contracted impurity, one who became tamei, while he was already standing in the holy temple. But the Gemara now looks at this difference between tabernacle and temple. But is it really superfluous to have both verses, one having been sufficient? Aren't they each necessary to teach their own ruling? As it is taught in Baraisa, the Rabbi Elazar says, if it is stated mishkan, tabernacle, why does the next verse state mikdash, temple? And if it is stated mikdash, why does it state mishkan in the previous one? So he explains, had the verse stated only mishkan, tabernacle, and not temple, mikdash, I would have said that one is liable for entering the mishkan, the tabernacle, in a state of impurity, since it was anointed with the anointing oil by Moses himself. It was the original consecration of this central, place of holiness for the Jewish people. And therefore it carries greater sanctity than the holy temple built by Solomon, because Solomon's temple was not anointed with the anointing oil that Moses compounded at God's direct command in the wilderness. And therefore we would say a person who is tamei, who enters the mishkan, violates this prohibition and becomes liable to bring that offering. But one who enters the mikdash doesn't become liable for that because it's a lower level of sanctity. And had the verse stated only mikdash and not stated mishkan, then I would have said that one is liable for entering the mikdash, the temple, in a state of tuma while impure, since its sanctity is an eternal sanctity. That spot was a permanent spot. The Temple Mount is forever. The Mishkan moved around in the wilderness and later in Israel. So its place of consecration was not a permanent place of sanctity. So therefore, I would have said that one is liable for entering the temple in a state of tuma, since its sanctity is an eternal sanctity. But he would not be liable for entering the Mishkan, the tabernacle, whose sanctity was only for its time. And for this reason, the Torah has one verse that says mishkan and another verse that says mikdash. So there's a reason for the two different words in those two verses, in verses that are otherwise referring to exactly the same law. Therefore, you can't say that the two verses come to teach the same law and that we could interpret them as teaching that it applies to you whether you were tamei before you entered or whether you became tamei while you were already had entered, because they're not redundant. They don't teach the same law because of this difference between mishkan and mikdash. So the Gemara answers this challenge by saying, Rabbi Lazar did not base his derivation on a superfluous verse, but on the change in wording between the two verses. He acknowledges the difference between mikdash and mishkan. Now this is what was difficult for him. Since the mishkan is also called mikdash, and the mikdash is also called mishkan, right? These words are not so carefully tied that mishkan means the tabernacle in the wilderness and mikdash means the holy temple in Jerusalem, because these very same words are actually used for the other meaning elsewhere in the Bible. How so? Since the mishkan is also called mikdash and the mikdash is also called mishkan, let the verse write either in both verses, mikdash or mishkan, right? Why didn't it say mikdash in both places or mishkan in both places? And we would have known that it refers to the same thing, whether it's the holy, the tent of meeting, right? The tabernacle whether it's the portable one in the wilderness or the permanent one in Jerusalem. We could have used one word, either mishkan for both places or mikdash for both places, and we still would have got the meaning. Now that there's a change, maybe it's alerting us to more than what it's referring to, that the law would apply in both places, and that there is an additional teaching going on because of this change, right? Why do I need both mishkan and mikdash? Conclude two conclusions from it, i.e. that one is liable even for tuma contracted while inside the grounds, not just went before you entered, and that the law applies both in the temporary structure built in the wilderness and the permanent structure built in Jerusalem. Now the Gemara questions its previous assumption. Granted, the mikdash is also called mishkan, as it is written, and I will set my mishkan among you, Leviticus 26:11. Here the reference is not to the tent in the desert, it is referring to the permanent structure in Jerusalem. How could that be? At the time of the Torah, that was many, many centuries before King David, right? At least 4 centuries before King David, and his son Solomon, who would build the temple. So how could, at the time of Moses and the children of Israel wandering around in the desert, how could they be talking about the holy temple in Jerusalem? But let's look here, where the reference is to the holy temple, as the verse is referring to that which will transpire after the Jewish people have settled in their land. It is referring to what will be the permanent structure. But from where do we derive that the mishkan, the temporary structure, could also be called the mikdash, the name for the more permanent structure? If we say that it is derived from that which is written, and the Kehatites, the bearers of, these are a subunit of the tribe of Levi, who were in the wilderness carrying all the pieces of the mishkan from one place to another, right? The Kehatites, the bearers of the mikdash, set forward. That's Numbers 10:21. So that instance of the term mikdash is not written with regard to the mishkan. We're not talking about the structure. Rather, it is written with regard to the ark, the Aron Kodesh, and the other sacred vessels. Rather, it is derived from a different place. And let them make me a mikdash, that I may dwell among them, from Exodus 25:8, where the reference is to the mishkan, as immediately afterward it is written, according to all that I will show you, the pattern of the mishkan. But there in the Torah, where God is saying to Moses, you're going to build this thing, God calls it the mikdash. So we know that the words are interchangeable for both the temporary structure in the desert and the permanent one in Jerusalem. New subject. The Mishna, our Mishna here in chapter 2, taught, if he bowed down or he tarried. Now we're talking about somebody who became tamei while he was standing in the courtyard of the temple. That can happen. So he doesn't become liable to bring a sin offering. He hasn't done anything wrong unless he doesn't get out. Right? As soon as he realizes that he's tamei, that he became tamei, like for example, God forbid, he was there visiting, having a very spiritual experience, and a guy who was also visiting, having a spiritual experience, had a heart attack and died, God forbid, and this guy tried to perform CPR, mouth-to-mouth resuscitation, whatever, and the fellow died. So now he has touched a corpse, right? So he became tamei with corpse tuma while standing in the holy temple. He hasn't done anything wrong. He did everything right. He was trying to save a life. So what does he have to do? He needs to get out quickly. How quickly, right? I mean, if he takes a breath after, trying hard to resuscitate somebody, and then he leaves, has he tarried? Has he violated the prohibition on being tamei while standing in the courtyard? What they're going to examine here is, okay, what is the minimum amount of time that a person has to tarry before leaving once he becomes aware that he is tamei, so that he did violate this idea of being in the mikdash while tamei, right? So it's about how long does he delay before he leaves? How long does he tarry before he leaves? So the Mishnah teaches, if he bowed down or he tarried in the temple courtyard long enough to bow down, or he went out by way of a longer route when he could have taken a shorter route, then he is liable to bring the sliding scale offering. Rava says they taught this only when he bowed down in the temple courtyard facing inward toward the Holy of Holies, as that alone is what we mean by when we say the word bowing in the Holy Temple. But if he bowed down facing outward, that is not considered bowing. When he bows facing outward, if he tarried in the temple courtyard long enough to bow down, yes, he is liable. But if he did not tarry long enough to bow down, no, he is not liable. What difference does it make which way you're facing? Well, if you're facing the Holy of Holies, you're going to go through a procedure of bowing. You don't just bend. It's not just a polite bow. You're in the presence, right? You're in the presence. Everyone is awestruck when they are standing in the courtyard of the temple. So if you're going to bow, it's going to be having a spiritual experience of bowing before the Lord. We're all in God. God is absolutely everywhere. But this was understood to be a place where God's presence was most strongly manifest in the universe. So if you're bowing there, it's not just a, hey, see ya, nice to see you, bow and go. It's a process, right? So if you go through that process, well, then you stayed around too long and you're going to become liable to bring this offering. If you don't go through that process, right, you just made some kind of a movement, some kind of genuflect, and then got out, okay, then you did not violate this prohibition. There are those who teach the statement of Rava with regard to the latter clause, or if he tarried in the temple courtyard long enough to bow down, he is liable to bring a sliding scale offering. It may be said by inference that bowing down itself entails tarrying, and the mere act of bowing does not render one liable. With regard to this, Rava says they taught this only when he bowed down facing outward. In such a case, he is liable only if he tarried long enough to bow down. But if he bowed down facing inward toward the Holy of Holies, he is liable even if he did not tarry for that length of time. And this is what the Mishna is saying. If he bowed down facing inward, or he tarried long enough to bow down while he was bowing down facing outward, he is liable. Getting a little bit lost in the weeds. Well, let's see where the law ends up. The halacha on this is, according to Rambam, Maimonides, if one became ritually impure while in the temple courtyard, if he then tarried or turned his face to the sanctuary and bowed, even without tarrying, he is liable to be punished with kares if he acted intentionally, and he must bring the sliding scale offering if he acted unwittingly. If he did not turn his face to the sanctuary, but he bowed facing outward, he is exempt unless he tarried long enough for a standard act of bowing, and this is in accordance with the opinion of Rava. The Gemara asks, what are the circumstances of bowing in which there is tarrying, and what are the circumstances of bowing in which there is no tarrying? So the Gemara answers, with regard to bowing in which there is no tarrying, that is merely kneeling. As for bowing in which there is tarrying, that is prostrating oneself while spreading one's arms and legs in total submission. That's the feeling that you would have when you want to bow before God at the place where God's presence is most strongly felt. You want to be utterly humble before the Lord. What does that look like? It's not just bending your knees. It's not just getting down to your knees. It's just lying on the floor face down with your legs and arms spread. Just utter submission, getting down as low as you can possibly go. The Gemara asks, and what is the measure of that tarrying? Okay, you didn't go through that kind of bowing, but you took too long to leave. Well, how long is that? So Rabbi Yitzchak Bar Nachmani and one other sage who was with him disagree about this. And who is that other scholar? Rabbi Shimon ben Pazi. And some say that it was Rabbi Shimon ben Pazi and one other sage who was with him. And who was that scholar? Rabbi Yitzchak Bar Nachmani. And some say it's Rabbi Shimon Bar Nachmani. So one sage says, it is as long as the time it takes to recite the following verse in its entirety. And the other sage says, it is as long as the time it takes to recite from the term, and they bowed, in the middle of that verse until the end. What is the verse? This is 2 Chronicles 7:3. So the whole verse is like this. And when all the children of Israel saw how the fire came down and the glory of the Lord upon the house, and they bowed with their faces to the ground upon the pavement and prostrated themselves and praised the Lord, saying, for he is good, for his steadfast love endures forever. I didn't time myself, but that sounds like, 20, 30 seconds, maybe at least 20 seconds, something like that, right? That's how long. It's not just a little bow, right? And it's nice that they're tying, it could have been any verse, right? A verse about, how you will examine a house for tzaras of a house in the walls and bring a kohen. No, you're talking about a verse that is 100% relevant to bowing in the house of the Lord. So that's the verse that we're going to use to measure the amount of time. If you lingered longer than that, if you tarried longer than that, you will become liable for violating this prohibition. Now, the Gemara discusses the different forms of bowing in greater detail. The sages taught the term kida indicates falling upon one's face. And so the verse states that then Bathsheba, right, David's wife, Solomon's mother, bowed vatikod with her face to the ground. Same root. 1 Kings 31. Kiriya, this means descending upon one's knees. And so the verse states with regard to Solomon, he rose from before the altar of the Lord from kneeling, mikeroa, upon his knees. And hishtachava, this is prostrating oneself while spreading his arms and legs in total submission. And so the verse states that Jacob asked in response to Joseph's relating of his dream, shall I and your mother and your brothers indeed come to bow down to you, to the ground? Right, in the incident of Joseph's dreams in Genesis 37:10, and this implies spread out completely on the ground. New subject. Rava raises a dilemma. Is tarrying long enough to bow down necessary to incur lashes? When do you incur lashes? If you do it on purpose, despite the warning. If one was warned not to remain in the temple courtyard in a state of impurity, is he liable to receive lashes only if he remains there long enough to bow down, completely spread out on the ground? Or is tarrying not necessary to incur lashes, and he's immediately liable to receive lashes? And the Gemara clarifies the two possibilities. Right? This is intentional transgression versus unwitting, which is what we've been talking about. Liability to bring that sin offering is only if you did it unwittingly. You forgot that you're tamei while standing in the temple. If you did it intentionally, the punishment could be lashes. Okay, so is it going to follow the same rules in terms of tarrying or not when we're talking about intentional transgression versus an unwitting one? Now this guy knows, right? It's not a lapse of awareness. He's like, hey, you are tamei. You need to go. And he doesn't leave. Well, how much... he doesn't leave. How long does that take before he becomes liable? Is tarrying long enough to bow down necessary to incur lashes? If one was warned not to remain in the temple court in a state of impurity, is he liable to receive lashes only if he remains there long enough to bow down, completely spread out on the ground? Or is tarrying not necessary to incur lashes, and he's immediately liable to receive the lashes? So the Gemara clarifies the two possibilities. Is it learned as a tradition that tarrying is necessary in order to incur liability to bring an offering, but not learned as a tradition that tarrying is necessary to become liable to receive lashes? Or, now we're on page 17a, perhaps it is learned as a tradition that tarrying is necessary to incur any liability for impurity within the temple, and it is no different whether the liability is to bring an offering, and no different whether it is to receive lashes. And the Gemara concludes, the dilemma shall stand. We don't know the answer. Rava raises another dilemma, and I'm almost done. Questions or comments, please get them in now. Rava raises another dilemma. If an impure person suspended himself in the airspace of the temple courtyard long enough to bow down, what are we talking about here? Right? So either this could be some kind of supernatural levitation, but his feet are not walking in the holy temple. He is not standing in the holy temple. He's flying, he's floating, he's somehow suspended in the air. So this could happen supernaturally, or it could be one of those like Mission Impossible, the guy's hanging on ropes from the roof so he won't trip the alarm, right? So let that be an image in our heads for a moment. If a person who is tamei suspended himself in the airspace of the temple courtyard long enough to bow down, he's not bowing, his feet are not on the ground, but he's there long enough to do a bowing, then what is the law? He's in the airspace. When it is learned as a tradition that an impure person is liable for tarrying in the temple, is this only with regard to tarrying that is suited for bowing, or with regard to tarrying that is not suited for bowing, as in this case where the person cannot bow as long as he is suspended in the air? It is not learned from the tradition that one is liable, or perhaps we learn from the tradition that there is liability for tarrying within the temple, and it doesn't matter whether the tarrying that you do could possibly lead to bowing or not. Which is it? We don't know. Teiku, the dilemma shall stand. Rav Ashi also raises another dilemma relating to this matter. If one intentionally rendered himself impure while he was in the temple courtyard, what is the law with regard to tarrying? Is it learned as a tradition that tarrying is necessary when one contracts impurity while in the temple in circumstances beyond his control, but we don't learn as a tradition that tarrying is necessary when he made himself impure intentionally? Or perhaps it is learned as a tradition that tarrying is necessary for any liability for impurity within the temple, and it doesn't matter whether he became impure through circumstances beyond his control, and it doesn't matter if he did it intentionally. Is there a difference? We don't know. Taiku, it shall stand unresolved. And finally, Rav Ashi raises another dilemma. If a Nazir, one who takes a vow to abstain, it's a vow, right? It's a vow, not an oath. If one who takes a vow of Naziris to abstain from products of the grapevine and not to cut his hair and not to come in contact with the dead during the period of time that he is a Nazir, like Samson. If a Nazir who is prohibited from contracting impurity imparted by a... If a Nazir who is prohibited from contracting impurity imparted by a corpse found himself alongside a grave, right? He didn't go there on purpose. He knows he's not supposed to walk over a grave, but he did by accident. Is tarrying there a necessary condition for him to incur lashes, or is tarrying not necessary? This has nothing to do with the Holy Temple. A Nazir is prohibited from coming into contact with the dead. So by accident, he's standing on a grave, and he realizes it. So if he keeps standing there, does he incur lashes if he's warned you got to leave and he doesn't leave? Or not? Right? Is tarrying there a necessary condition for him to incur lashes, or is tarrying not necessary and he is liable immediately if he doesn't leave? Is it learned as a tradition that tarrying is necessary within the temple, but not learned as a tradition that tarrying is necessary outside the temple, and the Nazir is liable immediately? Or perhaps it is learned as a tradition that tarrying is necessary for liability for impurity contracted in circumstances beyond one's control, and it is no different whether the impurity was contracted within the temple and no different whether it was outside the temple that this happened. Dilemma shall stand unresolved. Teku. That's where we'll stop. I'll take some questions now. But reminder, no class until Tuesday. We're going to be off for a few days, and we'll resume with God's help at the regular time on Tuesday of next week. Bill. Question, which we might get to or not. So this is how one consecrates territory, additional or otherwise, for the temple. What about the tabernacle in the days before the temple was erected? It remained at Shiloh for some time, but it was capable of moving. So what was the protocol for consecrating the space on which it was going to reside in the days before the kings? My understanding of this, it's a great question, Bill, is that they didn't consecrate the place where the tabernacle stood. The tabernacle consecrated the place where it stood just by being there, right? They didn't consecrate every spot where they erected the tabernacle in all the journeys in the wilderness that I'm aware of, right? So wherever the tabernacle itself was anointed and consecrated, and so wherever it was standing, that area of the ground, therefore, was consecrated. And so what's interesting about that is, so does that ground remain consecrated after the tabernacle leaves? Apparently not. Now, I know you can visit Shiloh in Israel. I have not. I think that it's understood to be a powerful visit, but I don't think it's understood to be holy ground in the same way that the Temple Mount is. So I don't think that you're consecrating the ground in that way. It's really the tabernacle itself, the Mishkan, that was consecrated. That's my understanding. I could be wrong. Lucy, I would have thought that the consecration of the Mishkan was forever. I mean the tent itself and the ark rather than the location. We agree. Yes. And the Mishkan is forever. Like, we don't know where it is, but it was not destroyed. It was hidden, and it remains hidden. So one day, perhaps when Mashiach comes, that will be revealed. And what's so interesting about this, our rabbi, Rabbi Kusel Kalmanson, taught something beautiful, right? One was a tent that they carried around in the wilderness on wagons, and the other was the Holy Temple of Solomon, that he had tens of thousands of workers laboring on it for years to make this magnificent edifice. Absolutely magnificent. Which one lasted longer? The Mishkan, right? The Holy Temple was destroyed. The Mishkan was hidden away, but it remains in existence and will be revealed one day. So what was the difference between them? Why did one merit to exist forever and the other one existed for hundreds of years and then was destroyed? Well, the Mishkan, the tabernacle in the wilderness, it was built with funds and effort from the entire Jewish people. Everyone donated. Everybody was involved in the building project. And the Holy Temple, it was really, David wanted it. Solomon really wanted it. But a lot of people who worked on it, it was conscripted labor. There was taxes that were used to pay for it. So it was not really, it was from God. It was following the orders of God, like David wanted. And God said, well, you won't merit to build it, but your son will. But it was not, an order given by God that the people, and as en masse, all of us, freely engaged in. Right? And that's why the Mishkan is forever, because it is our communal project in every way. And why the mikdash, the Holy Temple of Solomon, is not forever. The place is, but not the building. Sharon, the term Mishkan literally means where one dwells, right? Like the Shekhinah and the Mishkan, same root. So it really could be where God dwells. The traveling tabernacle or the Holy Temple couldn't. Yes, absolutely, absolutely. And that's why the words could be interchangeable for the two locations. Renee, about the one suspended in the air is a temple zip line. I like it. Or some sort of hovercraft, says Bill. And Sharon says, in the airspace could be like when Isaiah was lifted up in the air during his revelation experience. Absolutely. Anything is possible when God has chosen a person to be a prophet and speak through him. You could survive in the belly of a fish for 3 days. You could certainly float in the air. That's what I've got for us tonight. And with God's help, we'll be together again Tuesday next week. I wish you all an uplifting few days. You should have a beautiful, wonderful Shabbos. Go into it in peace, hearing good news. Enjoy its peace and emerge from Shabbos hearing only good news. And that all the hostages should be freed, if not today, then tomorrow. If not tomorrow, by Shabbos. Please, God, free all the hostages and let this war end with a secure and lasting peace for the land of Israel and the nation of Israel everywhere that we are. All the best.